Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, May 30th, 2014. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we're getting all the news dumps that the administration is hoping you'll all have forgotten about by next Monday. And, of course, the big news today, of course, is that VA Director Shinseki went into a meeting at the White House this morning, apparently committed seppuku right on the carpet in front of the president's desk there. He's resigned. Obama has regretfully accepted the resignation. And, of course, what this means, the message we're getting from the corporate media propagandists is now we are all supposed to think the bad guy has been punished and the problem will go away. And, of course, that is complete and utter nonsense. As Jon Stewart illustrated last week on The Daily Show, the U.S. government has always shortchanged the veterans. It's a systemic issue, and changing the guy who's at the top of the VA is probably not going to change any of the policies. Okay? Now, it has been documented that Obama did know about this problem all the way back in 2008. So when he gets up there in his speech and he says, this is unacceptable, what he means is it's unacceptable that we, the people, found out about all this stuff, especially in an election year. Now, another one of the people who are fleeing the sinking ship is Jay Carney, White House press spokesslug. I guess he had just his fill of bovine excrement that he was expected to regurgitate onto the media. There have been mutterings and rumors for several weeks he was getting ready to leave, but apparently today is he's stepping out. They've already named a new press spokesperson, whose job it will be to stand there with their hair on fire, insisting they cannot smell any smoke. And if you go back and you look at some of the White House press spokespeople, it is a very stressful job. Back in the Clinton years, there was a big scandal how Dee Dee Myers, right after the death of Vincent Foster, she just developed this huge drinking problem. There was a DUI, and they had to let her go as well. So I guess it's not easy getting up there and just bald-faced lying to 330 million of your fellow Americans and get paid for it. So anyway, as I mentioned earlier, and we linked to a report in the Washington Times confirming that even Veterans Affairs officials were telling Obama as he came into office in 2008 that they should not be trusting any of these reported wait times that the facilities were reporting, that there was a known problem all the way throughout, and nobody really did anything about it until we, the people, found out. And that is where the importance of the independent media comes in, because the corporate media didn't do this until a whistleblower came forward, and we made a big stink about it here in the independent media. And then they said, oh, well, this is a big story. We got to cover it here. And I think in one way, Obama was using Shinseki as a distraction, because if you notice, the corporate media isn't talking about the IRS targeting of dissidents anymore. They've stopped talking about Benghazi. They're certainly not reporting on what's going on over in Libya. There's only very filtered reports coming out about what's going on in Ukraine. We'll be getting into that a little bit. But as you're probably already aware, the Obama administration is trying to find some way they can censor or classify this supposed legal document that says it's perfectly legal and constitutional for the President of the United States of America to kill American citizens anywhere in the world if they're only suspected of supporting terrorism. No trial by jury, no due process, no opportunity for a defense, no judge, no jury, just executioner. Now, I think probably most of us who study the Constitution understand there really is no way to do that. So what the Obama administration did is stand up and say, we have this legal document prepared by this attorney that says, yes, I can do this, and you have to believe this because a lawyer made this. That's a rather weak argument in our current culture. And a week ago they said, yes, we will let the public see this memo to satisfy them that it is legal for the president to simply knock us off whenever he feels like it. And obviously they've had second thoughts, and now they're trying to classify it and provide only a summary to spin new lies, and the summary will be, yes, this document says it's legal, and that's all you need to know. Now, getting over to the Chilcot inquiry, which is looking into just how it was that Britain wound up getting suckered into this war in Iraq, which killed a lot of their young people, wounded a lot of their young people. We know, going back, there were no nuclear weapons of mass destruction. There were no mobile biological weapons laboratories. It was all just made up out of thin air. We know about Tony Blair's dodgy dossier and all the other fakery that was going on. And the Chilcot inquiry is trying to hold the former prime minister to account for basically lying their people into a war. And the Chilcot inquiry has centered on private communications between then President George Bush and then Prime Minister Tony Blair to sort of get at the bottom of what's going on. And now, of course, they're saying, no, you can't have these memos. You can't have this communication. It would jeopardize U.S.-UK relations. Meaning that the United States would be really angry and unhappy if Britain officially acknowledged that the war was not about weapons of mass destruction, especially in an election year. They're still trying to maintain the official story, even though nobody believes it anymore. It's another theater piece. You know, come on, guys. We know you lied. And all you're doing with all this cover-up stuff is proving you're not manly enough to stand up and say, yeah, we lied. Which underscores Kerry's comment, Edward Snowden, you should man up and face the consequences. Well, U.S. government set the example. Tony Blair set the example. George W. Bush set the example. Get up there and say, yeah, we lied you into the war in Iraq. Until we have an honest government in this country, Kerry has no business castigating anybody else about lack of manliness. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security are trying to keep secret the databases regarding the use of drones from the American people. It's all secret. They're doing things they do not want you to know about. And that tells you these are bad things they're doing, because if they were doing something good, it would be headline on all the newspapers. It would be the lead story in the corporate media TV shows. All this stuff that's being kept secret is being kept secret for a reason. They know you will not agree. They know it's not legal. They know it's not constitutional. They know it's war crimes. Now, getting on over to the Ukraine, the situation there is really very tense. Russia Today had a report out earlier basically saying it looks like Poroshenko, who doesn't really have that much political experience, is trying to come out and prove that he's a tough guy and he's going to take steps. And he's talking about, we're, the enemies of the Ukrainian people, which are more Ukrainian people. And he's just trying to absolutely bring down the hammer to prove that he's a new tough guy. What he's actually proving is he is a new dictator. Ukraine has a brand new dictator installed by force, legitimized, so they say, with an obviously fraudulent election. Remember, we had the pictures of those transparent ballot boxes in Ukraine with stacks of neatly folded ballots already in the bottom of them, which does not happen when you're putting ballots in one at a time from the top. They don't form themselves into nice little cubic blocks of paper. Now, interesting story coming out of Ria Novosti, is that Poroshenko's own wealth is going to get in the way of him doing anything good for the people of Ukraine. Because apparently they don't have anything like a blind trust. He's allowed to have all of his money, and he is going to be making his decisions based on where his investments lie. And they make a very interesting comment from Sam Pizzagatti, who's at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. Just because you're very rich doesn't make you smart or wise. You're just somebody who's rich. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Craig is in the control room. Aloha.
Hello.
Whoops, we're getting a bad echo coming back from, looks like it's gone away. We're going to take a phone call. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, quite a few things. First of all, I wanted to say something really quick. It's kind of funny that if you support the say, pro-Russians or the anti-neo-fascists over there in Ukraine, that those rebels to the U.S. government are bad, bad, bad.
Yes.
But Syrian rebels, paid for through our tax dollars and backed by Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra, now those are good, good, good. It's hypocrisy.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, you've got Obama is out there saying that, the Syrian government is killing the Syrian people, therefore we have to attack and invade Syria and give them what for. But the junta in Ukraine is killing Ukrainian people, so we've got to send them more bullets and bombs and weapons to help them do that. And, it amazes me that the White House Propaganda Corps doesn't seem to understand that out here in the real world, when you put those two things together, it's obvious, there's something else going on other than we are the moral leader of the world and the world's policeman and everything.
It's actually immoral. Anyway, the reason I called, though, Mike, that issue just drives me insane. But anyway, you remember a while back when they had the announcement that the SSL, the secure sockets on these web pages were compromised?
Yes.
The security certificates. Well, here's a thesis on mine: is if you're asked to change your passwords, couldn't in fact then that might be a reason that they want you to change your password just so that they can intercept that and get you a new password?
Who knows? I mean, a little further in the show I was going to talk about this, but cybercrime has gone through the roof in this country. They're now saying that basically over this last year, half of all the adult computer users in America were the victim of some kind of a hack. I know they got my wife last Christmas through the little chip in her credit card. And, where is this mighty NSA that's monitoring all of our computer traffic and everything? Why can't they find these guys? Or, alternatively, is this the NSA doing it, trying to mess up the system, leading to a virtual 911 where the government will say, well, we have to take back complete control of the Internet to deal with the cybercrime. And it turns out it's the NSA. Because, again, look for what should be there and isn't. And right now, the NSA is dealing with so much bad press. They would love an opportunity to be able to show to the American people that they're actually capable of doing something useful, like getting these hackers, finding the bozos who are locking up iPhones and iPads right now and demanding ransom. And we don't hear a peep from the NSA.
It's commerce.
Yeah, the two don't go together. Something's very wrong about this.
Yeah, it's like they announce a new virus, go out and buy a new virus program like that. It's commerce. It's to drive people into purchasing things.
Well, it's the old mafia protection racket. You got to buy protection for your computer or something bad going to happen. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. All right. Love you, Mike. Take care. Okay.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. All right. Now, getting on back to the Ukraine, interim Prime Minister Yatsenyuk is touring Germany, trying to sort of mollify concerns over this sanction war crushing not only Ukraine's economy but that of Germany as well. But everywhere he's going, he's being met with these protests where the protesters are shouting that he's a terrorist and a killer. So they're definitely losing the PR war on this one. Now, the people's mayor, the separatist mayor in Slavyansk, is saying that the body count, as you were, of the Ukrainian soldiers is now over 1,000. They've reported shooting down 2, 3, maybe even as many as 4. They're waiting on confirmation of the helicopters. And basically what they're dealing with is these Ukrainian soldiers on the side of Kiev, they are not at all enthusiastic about having to go out and kill their fellow countrymen. Now, Poroshenko is already out there trying to spin that the separatists aren't real Ukrainians, that they're really Russians, and therefore it's okay to hate them and dehumanize them and go shoot them. But it's not really working at all. And how long has this been going on? And they still can't gain any ground. And then Poroshenko is resorting to tactics and methods that are bringing down the condemnation of the world on him. Apparently 7 children were injured in Slavyansk when the Ukrainian army shelled a residential area. There's no reason to shell. You're supposed to be picking legitimate military targets. And they're just basically raining destruction down. It's a war of terror. We're going to blow up everything, blow up your schools, blow up whatever. And it's still not working. We just got this story that came out of it's a YouTube video, and I just put it up on whatreallyhappened.com. Apparently, 100 Ukrainian police officers have changed sides to the Russian separatists. They got a major problem with desertion. Kiev is already resorting to conscription. They're just grabbing young men off the streets and putting them in uniforms and say, you go, shoot them here. And evidence has now surfaced that Ukraine's armed forces, the Kiev forces, are using internationally banned ammunition. Now, when there is a war by international treaty and convention, you're only supposed to use certain types of ammunition, full metal jacket, that minimizes the expansion when the bullet hits the person. But apparently the Ukrainian Kiev forces are using expansion bullets, exploding bullets, hollow points, the kind of stuff the U.S. government is buying to point at you. These are all violations of international law. And again, we get back to this horrible hypocrisy coming out of the White House. Syria's government is killing Syrians, so the U.S. has to invade. Ukraine's junta, which wasn't elected, is killing the Ukrainian people, so we have to give Kiev more weapons and bullets and bombs. This doesn't make any sense at all. And it's a reminder that Washington, D.C.'s propaganda campaign has lost any sense of a consistent, coherent narrative. And I think one of Washington, D.C.'s biggest mistakes they've made, and we should be glad that they made it, is they sort of contracted the propaganda out to advertising agencies and marketing companies who aren't used to thinking about maintaining a consistent storyline across multiple years. It's all about the latest commercial, 30 seconds on the air, and 2 weeks from now, everybody's forgotten that, and we're selling ads for the competing product, and they just flip back and forth and focus group everything. But whoever's in charge of this has forgotten that for a propaganda campaign to work against the people, it has to present the illusion of a consistent reality that can be trusted and believed in. And when you have all of these flip-flops and the terrorists are bad over here and the terrorists are good over here because they're working for us, and these obvious contradictions, it's just broadcasting. These are all lies, and you shouldn't believe a single one of them. Now, Russia has announced that they have captured a group of Ukrainian, meaning Kiev, operatives inside Crimea. And apparently they were going to start carrying out terrorist attacks in an attempt to destabilize Crimea and bring it back into the Ukraine, which, of course, is as soon as he won his phony election, Poroshenko's out there saying, I will bring Crimea back to the Ukraine. And apparently they were going to try and play that little destabilization game down there, and the Russian security services caught them at it. Now, over in Great Britain, their defense committee chief is basically saying that the West will have to build new military bases to deter Putin. They're bringing back the Cold War. We can't even afford what they're doing now, and they're already out there saying, oh, you've got to give us all your money. We've got to build more military bases and more weapons, and we've got to keep the Russians away. They're replaying the script from the 1950s. Russians are bad, and you've got to give us your money and your children, or the Russians going to get you. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you're probably aware, in all of this sanctions this and sanctions that, and it's going back and forth, the U.S. is not really forming any kind of a coalition that wants to go ahead with this economic nonsense. And France had announced that they were going to complete their contract with Russia regarding these 2 Mistral helicopter carrier ships that Russia had contracted for from French companies, and basically they don't want to have a reputation for reneging on the deal on the international level here. Well, apparently the U.S. government is trying to do some major arm twisting, telling France, no, don't you sell these to Russia, you have to sell them to NATO. And it's none of the U.S. government's business to tell the government of France what to do, even though we've been hearing about this so-called U.S. exceptionalism, where they're still operating in Washington, D.C., like they've got the right to tell the rest of the world how to run their business when they clearly can't even run this country. It's the absurdity of it all. Now, a story coming out of RINF.com, the International Monetary Fund is already at work inside Ukraine, urging austerity. You must have austerity so you can pay back all the money that we loaned you with the usurious interest on top of it. It's time for austerity. Like there's anything left after all the shelling going on over there in the East. And basically, this insistence on austerity is a major threat to Ukraine's chance of economic survival. But these bankers don't care. They just want more money for themselves, and they don't care if countries like Cyprus and Greece and France and Italy and all these other countries are driven down to abject poverty. In fact, they think that's the world is supposed to be. They have all the wealth, and everybody else is living in squalor and paying rent on it. That's their goal for the New World Order. Now, remember, earlier in the week, we were reporting that after all this overthrow and all the coup d'etat and the installation of a junta by force and starting a civil war in Ukraine to get them into the European Union, now Poroshenko is backing off and saying, wait a minute, we depend on exports to Russia, and we can't take that economic hit. If we join the EU, we've got absolutely no guarantees that we can sell our export products to Europe or the United States of America. By the way, Kiev did make a partial payment to Russia on their outstanding debt on the oil and gas. $750 million, about 20% of what they owe. And so now, of course, if Russia shuts off the gas, Russia's the bad guy. We made a payment. They can't turn us off now. We mentioned this earlier in the week, but it's worth a recap now. Obama is now getting ready to deploy U.S. military advisors in Syria. That's how Vietnam started, with advisors. We're sending over advisors. They're not actually in combat. Of course, if somebody shoots at them, they're allowed to shoot back. Because Syria isn't going very well. The U.S. has been in there covertly for 3 years trying to get Assad out. It looks like Assad is going to just sweep this next election based on the early results coming in from the Syrian refugees living in Lebanon. And when he wins re-election, it's going to completely undermine the entire U.S. public justification for being in Syria. Oh, he's an evil, cruel tyrant. His people hate him. We have to save the Syrian people from the evil Assad. But we have to help the government in Kiev just murder all of their people who don't like the fact that an unelected government took control of their country and is already bowing to the IMF for austerity. You must make do with less so the bankers can have more. You must make do with less so the bankers can have more. By the way, little definition here. When you yourself decide to live a simpler, less expensive lifestyle, that's austerity. When the government and bankers come in and tell you you have to live a simpler, less expensive lifestyle so that you can give them more money, that's dictatorship. Apparently over at Frontline, they've run another story showing how the Obama administration is supplying weapons to terrorists in the Middle East, as long as the terrorists will do the U.S. bidding. They're sort of, terrorists here are bad, terrorists here are good. And again, when you have these obvious contradictory policies and agendas, it craters the credibility of the U.S. government. Down in Spain, you're probably aware that the Catalonian Independence Party did very well in the European Parliament elections. Now Spain's Basque region is proclaiming their right to self-determination. They want to break off and form a new country. And remember, it is in that charter of the United Nations that all people have a natural, pre-existing right to self-determination. If your government is not doing a good job for you, the people, you have a right to basically say, all right, we're going to form our own country. We're going to go off and do something here. And, of course, the United States position is, no, we are committed to preserving the territorial integrity of national boundaries, which is going to come back to haunt them because we're getting word that Israel is considering outright annexation of the West Bank, which will change all those national borders. And we'll be back in another set of double standards and hypocrisy from the White House that, changing the Ukrainian borders is bad, but changing the borders of Israel is good. Latest poll, the French president Holland, his popularity has hit an all-time record low. And, I'm seeing something very bizarre in all of these primaries here in the United States of America, because we know from polls that approval of members of Congress is at an all-time low, and yet somehow the incumbents are magically coming up with voting majorities to keep their jobs. There's a disconnect there between the expressed public distrust and opposition of Congress and the ringleaders in Congress somehow magically winning their elections again. There's something going on there. Now, a lot of people are very concerned over the latest directive from the White House, 3025.18, which authorizes the use of military force against U.S. citizens on American soil during times of unrest. Ever since they started buying all these submachine guns and hollow point bullets, been telling you the U.S. government is preparing to declare war on the states and the American people. This is another indication. This directive is a flagrant violation of posse comitatus, which makes it illegal to deploy U.S. military forces against Americans on American soil. This is the reason they've been militarizing the civilian police, giving them tanks and body armor and automatic weapons and flashbang grenades that they can throw into babies' cribs and all the rest of that stuff to try and sort of weasel around that limit. But now the president, forget posse comitatus. I'm going to authorize U.S. military force against American citizens on American soil. And this basically, I think, hammers home the agenda that the U.S. government cannot run this country the way they're supposed to under the Constitution any longer. And they don't want to resign. They don't want to give up their well-paying, cushy government jobs. They don't want to give up the perks. They don't want to give up, that party town, Washington, D.C., Sodom on the Potomac. And they've clearly gone off the constitutional reservation, and I will maintain that the federal government is legal and legitimate only when it is in compliance fully and completely with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They're trying to convince you that they can go the other way. It's a good thing when we take away your right to freedom of speech. It's a good thing when we take away your right to peacefully assemble. It's a good thing when we spy on you all the time. It's a good thing when we take away your guns. No, it isn't. And you look at how hard they're trying to push that, and, thankfully, they're getting a huge pushback from the American people who just are fed up. Alrighty, looking over at mygoal.co down in New Zealand, former Bundesbank vice president is saying, now's the time to be getting physical silver, physical gold, and he says this current international private central banking cartel is a pure fiction. It's an absolute, complete scam designed to strip the real wealth away from the people and put it in the pockets of these private bankers. And he's out there saying that all this quantitative easing, currency debasement, interest rates at zero, and all the bubbles that have been built up to make the insiders rich and dump the losses on those who got to the party too late, shows it's just one gigantic fraud and scam. And that's why when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, right at the very top, the absolute last thing that should ever be allowed to happen in the new nation is for a privately owned central bank to be given control of the nation's money supply. Cannot, will not allow that to happen. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, we know the United States government has a bad habit of sort of rigging the various indicators of the economy to get the best results, especially in an election year. We know about this horrible fraud they have been perpetuating by claiming the unemployment rate is 6 to 7%, and that's complete nonsense. Going over to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics' own website, and we take the number of Americans who are willing and able to work, obviously that excludes children and retirees and those with disabilities, and you get a number. And then you look at the number of people who do not have jobs, and it actually turns out the real jobless rate in the United States of America is close to 60%. That's a 6 with a 0 after it. They love to fudge the numbers. Now, in the rate of inflation, they pointedly exclude fuel costs and food, and these are the areas most susceptible to inflationary price increases. But they leave those out so they can say, oh, the inflation, it's not too bad. With the Federal Reserve creating trillions of dollars out of thin air and pouring it all over Wall Street and Washington, D.C., and they say, oh, there's no inflation going on here. There's very little inflation. Story coming out of Blacklisted News. U.S. food inflation is running at 22%. And my wife and I are certainly seeing that here. Both for the food that we are buying for ourselves and for the food we're trying to acquire for these food programs we are supporting. We've seen the prices just going right through the roof. And we have 5 years of the federal government insisting that despite a $3.5 trillion increase in monetary expansion, the inflation rate is below 2%. That's complete nonsense. Now, the Department of Agriculture is trying to claim that the food inflation is caused by the drought conditions in California, which are severe. The infrastructure is falling apart out there, and usable water is pouring into places it's not needed. But last year's drought was actually worse, and food prices fell by 6%. The real problem is Federal Reserve monetary stimulus is creating inflation. There's no way that you can create that much money out of thin air and not have inflation. And because the United States is a net importer of food from other countries and the dollar is losing value, that's the reason the prices are going up. Plus, there's the normal rule of inflation. When you have too much cash chasing around too few goods and services, prices are going to rise. Prices are always going to rise to absorb the available cash flow. That's just the way these pricing strategies work in these stores. Now, the chief executive officer of BlackRock, Larry Fink, is pointing to a new potential villain in this whole economic house of cards. We know about the derivatives problem, record level exposure on derivatives. It's going to all blow up the instant anybody in Europe goes bankrupt and defaults. It's all going to start coming apart here. But he is pointing at what are called leveraged exchange traded funds that he says have major structural problems that make them very vulnerable. In fact, he said this alone could blow up the whole industry. Because all of these financial corporations on Wall Street and around the world, all the money junkies, they're not creating these financial offerings to serve the general good, the nation, or the people. These are just the latest scam that pours lots of money into their pockets and then dumps the losses on those who got too late to the party or through bailouts on the general population. That's what they do. That's all that they do. Even after the meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008, they're still out there bundling mortgages. They're bundling student loans. They're even bundling home alarm contracts to offer as investments. Now, I made an oblique reference to this a little bit earlier, but I want to go into this in a lot more depth. This is a horrible, horrible story. It's all over the net right now. Basically, it involves a police SWAT team raid on a house. And apparently there was some drug dealing going on. Undercover agents had purchased some drugs. They're not even saying what they are. And then the SWAT team came back to execute a no-knock warrant. And one of the SWAT team officers tossed a flashbang grenade in through the window into the crib of a 19-week-old little baby. And it went off right in front of the kid's face. The kid is now in the hospital. He's in a medically induced coma. They can't even at this point let him wake up because of the pain he's going to be in. This militarization of the police has just reached absurd levels. There are ways to carry out these kind of raids without harming innocent people. And don't forget, the ADL is now including in their promotional literature their pride that they are involved in the training of America's police force. So if you're wondering why the American police are now treating the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians, you know why. And as we suffer more and more of these kinds of abuses, we have to realize this is what Palestine deals with every single day at the hands of the Israeli government. Whatever happened to check your targets, protect the innocent? Whatever happened to use force only when necessary? But they're doing these full-on assaults on these houses for dealing a little whatever it was they were dealing. And I'm not saying it was right for them to deal with it, although obviously the war on drugs is here to basically crush out the competition of the big players, meaning the CIA. But they basically tossed a flashbang grenade into the crib with this little kid. They're supposed to be better than that. And I got to tell you right now, at this point, rather than see more innocent people get killed, I think it's time that we rescind this whole no-knock dynamic entry approach. Remember, since 9/11, the American police departments have murdered 8 times as many innocent Americans as the terrorists have. But we're supposed to go along with it because, after all, the police mean well. The terrorists have bad intentions, so we should condemn them. But the police mean well, even when they carry out these atrocities. So we're supposed to look the other way. Now, down in Albuquerque, which has become the focal point of all this awareness of police brutality going completely out of control. And by the way, the autopsy on that homeless man showed he was shot in the back. Apparently, he had already surrendered and was coming down the hill with the police when they just, for some reason, opened fire on him. And those Albuquerque Police Department officers who are at the center of this whole scandal, they're temporarily off the force. They're still getting their pay. They're on a paid vacation. Maybe that's why they shot the guy. Said, oh, man, I'm getting tired. I need a paid vacation. Boom, we'll shoot him. We'll get, a month of paid vacation off. Which brings us to the incident in Santa Barbara. Because, with all this dynamic entry and taser and shoot first and ask questions later, apparently when the police were called by Elliot Rogers' parents, worried about these videos he was making, and the police showed up and said, he seems like he's okay. And they're now admitting they did not even look at the videos that had prompted the phone calls. They basically came in and said, he's okay, and they walked on out. Now, that strikes me as a little odd. This is Northern California, where they shoot you in the head with a tear gas canister if you don't like banks. And they came in, talked to him for 10 minutes, and said, he's fine, and they left. This is really beginning to stink. In fact, it reminds me very much of this story that came out about how Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton worked to keep Boko Haram off the government's terrorist watch list, meaning they're a controlled, useful asset. And it sounds like maybe because of these videos online, they had sort of already picked up on this kid as being a really good patsy for another staged mass shooting. And that's why the cops had this hands-off attitude. Remember, there are eyewitnesses to a second person in that BMW doing the actual shooting. We got to take a break for our top-of-the-hour segment. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2 of our program today. And we're talking about the terrible shooting in Santa Barbara. And, of course, the gun grabbers are having orgasms over this. Rahm Emanuel in Chicago is passing more laws to try and restrict and limit gun sales. Only so many purchases per month. They want to videotape all gun purchases to deter people from using fake IDs. Chicago already has some of the strictest gun control in the entire country, and their gun violence has just gone through the roof. And it just confirms over and over and over again that where the people are allowed to carry arms as a defense, crime will go down. And when the people are disarmed, it's open season on them and crime goes up. So if you are anti-gun, you are pro-crime, and that's just the way it is. Now, of course, everybody's trying as hard as they can not to look at the other aspect of this case, which is that this kid was under treatment for psychiatric problems. 3 different mental health professionals were treating him. And we know how those guys love to write prescriptions. Now, we don't have Elliot Rogers' full medical information yet, but it has been reported one of the medications he was on is risperidone, which is an antipsychotic. Now, by the way, if you want to ban psychotics from owning guns, you're not going to get an argument from me. Just leave us law-abiding, safety-conscious, harmless people alone. But that's not the goal. They want to take everybody's guns away because of what these nuts are doing. And let me tell you how absurd that is. We know that drunk drivers kill people with cars. Are they going to take all the cars away because of what the drunk drivers did? We know these drunk drivers probably didn't intend to cause this mayhem. They're the victims of a chemical that is altering their brains. And so are all of these shooters. They're being given these chemicals that alter their brains. And yes, I did find a study that links risperidone with acts of extreme violence. And some very, and again, it's only a small percentage of the users, but it is there. And apparently it's very interesting looking at the charts here. People on risperidone who experienced uncontrollable violent urges, 50% of them happen after taking the medication from 1 to 6 months. And then there's a pause where it seems to work just fine. And then between 2 and 5 years, the other half had the issue. And here's the one that really stuns you. It was strictly the males. No women on risperidone had any of these violent impulses. It was 100% to the male. So it's somehow tied in with gender identity or something like that. Now, I did reprise to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com my resource page on mass violence linked to prescription psychiatric medication. Now, what's really interesting is back in 2011, it turns out Time magazine ran a story saying that, we're not going to say these medications are causing violence, but there does seem to be a correlation. And if you go over to ssristories.com, you will see hundreds and hundreds of documented cases of people who were put on these medications or trying to get off of them, and all of a sudden just completely consumed with violent impulses to others and themselves. And yes, they used guns. They also used knives and baseball bats and cars and firearms. Remember this thing in Santa Barbara, half the fatalities were from knife wounds, but we've got to blame the guns. We've got to take the guns away. It's a medical problem with very poorly made, poorly tested pharmaceutical products, and they're big business, and that's why nobody wants to talk about it. The corporate media isn't going to cover this story because then they'd lose those lucrative, glitzy commercials for the latest patented molecule. Government doesn't want to deal with it because Big Pharma are huge campaign contributors. The United States Congress did hold hearings on the link between SSRIs and violence and then chose to do nothing about it. Now, following Sandy Hook, when questions were being raised about what medications Adam Lanza was on, a public interest group invoked the state's equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act to try and obtain Adam Lanza's medical records. And the assistant prosecutor for the state's medical examiner office, Patrick Quanashy, and we got this on videotape, he came out and said that even if in this one case the medication caused the shooting, that was not important for the public to know because they might stop taking their medications. And then if you go over to Connecticut's financial information, you will see how much Connecticut depends on the pharmaceutical corporations. So they're not looking out for you. Patrick Quanashy isn't looking out for you. They're looking to protect the profits of the pharmaceutical corporations. Now, apparently, this is a story over an Investment Watch blog. Obama is, apparently a leak has come out exposing that the Obama administration is working on finding some way to outlaw and confiscate all guns. Again, a complete violation of the Second Amendment. And doable only if there's some kind of a artificially created national emergency, which is why I get very leery when people like Adam Kokesh say they're going to march into Washington, D.C. armed. Or when before the George Zimmerman acquittal, the whole week before, all we heard on the media is, there'll be race riots if he's let off. There'll be race riots all over the country. It'll be like the Rodney King riots in every city in America if Zimmerman's acquitted. And Zimmerman was acquitted, and no riots happened. We caught them trying to fake one. because we the people understand this is what the government is trying to do. They're trying to provoke a crisis that will allow them to say, okay, it's a national emergency, no more Constitution, no more Bill of Rights, trust us, it's only temporary, which is what Nixon said when he ended gold convertibility. And so we're getting this story over at Investment Watchblog saying, yeah, they are actively looking for a way to take away all the guns of the American people because they're scared of us, because we don't believe them anymore. We don't trust them anymore. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Obi in Colorado. Obi, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to talk about something that you had talked about briefly earlier, and that's the election process. I've been a patriot for 32 years, and, 25 years or so ago, I was living in Texas, and there were elections going on for House of Representatives, and, the polling was all showing that, the incumbent was behind, and yet when the election was over with, that guy won by, 5 or 6%. And, our elections have been being rigged for a very long time, and they're just open in your face with it. I don't believe the American people are stupid enough to keep re-electing these corporate criminals. They're not representatives; they're corporate criminals.
No, our elections are a complete farce. It's part of the theater presentation to convince the American people that we still have some say in what this government is doing, and we absolutely do not. Now, for those who've never been over there, there's a wonderful website called blackboxvoting.org, and the lady who runs it, Bev Harris, was featured in an HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy, talking about just how easy it is to see that all of these elections are being fraudulent, and these invisible inside computer electronic voting machines have just made it much easier. But it has been around for a long time. There was a book put out called Vote Scam, all the way back in the Clinton years, before the electronic machines really got going. And it was written by the Collier brothers, who are also famous for founding the Hawaiian Tropic line of tanning products. And one of the brothers decided to run for public office. He got cheated out of winning, and that inspired them to write the book, and it is available online. And it has been going on all along. And something that shocks a lot of people that they don't understand. There is no government or civilian oversight of the national elections. The votes are tabulated by a privately owned company called Voters News Service, although, like Blackwater, they change their name all the time to sort of disguise what they're doing. But all the precincts send the numbers into this privately owned company, and the privately owned company then tells the networks, this is who won the election, and nobody is allowed to double check. And they've been caught faking election results. They got caught during the Iowa caucuses back when Buchanan was running. Just blatant in-your-face fraud. We have to take a break for commercials. Obi, thank you very much. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones real quick. Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Big Texas, howdy to you. Hey,
howdy.
I'm starting to forget what I was going to talk to you about. For one thing, I forgot.
The illegals. You were going to talk about the illegals.
Oh, yeah, they dumped them off in Phoenix.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, now, I understand that Sheriff Arpaio, he's got buses, and he drives the people home back to the Mexican border, if they're Mexicans. But these people, I understand, are from Central America. I think they stuck them on him.
Well, we've been seeing that for a long time, especially with the homeless population, is they'll just round them all up, put them in a bus, take them to the county line, and toss them over. We see them constantly being moved around here on the island of Oahu. They really can't take them to the state borders because it's a very long swim once you're outside the state border. But
I think they stuck them on him.
Well, actually, a few years ago, through this local food program I'm working with, I met somebody who had been with the state government's resources to deal with the homeless and hungry, and they said they'd found evidence that other cities on the mainland who only have a few homeless, they were buying them one-way plane tickets to Hawaii so that they could get rid of them and send them down here. And I guess if you're going to be homeless, Hawaii's a really kind of a nice place to do it. You got beaches, you got and the rest of it. They were talking about a program at one point where the state of Hawaii was going to buy one-way plane tickets for the homeless as long as they had somebody on the mainland who had agreed to take them in. Where if you got an uncle in Poughkeepsie and he's willing to take you in if you can get there, we'll buy you the plane ticket to Poughkeepsie. I don't know that ever went anywhere. But, yeah, this is right now in these hard economic times, their solution is, look, let's just scrape them out of here and make them somebody else's problem. They just cleaned out all the homeless camps in Waikiki because it was the tourism board was just complaining about too many of the tourists were giving money to the homeless instead of spending it at the T-shirt and bathing suit stores.
And then the way I understand is Mexico won't take them either. They're not Mexicans.
Yeah, it's a real problem, which sort of begs the question: how did they get here?
Is what it is.
How did they get here? If they're from Central America and they're here in the U.S., they had to come through Mexico, at least heading north.
They came through Mexico. You and I both know that.
There was a story that we put up at the website, I think it was only yesterday, where apparently this flood of illegals coming across the border from Mexico are saying they are being told in their original homes that if they can get to the United States, Obama is going to grant them amnesty and make them citizens.
Yeah.
And, of course, all over Europe right now, in the wake of this backlash against the European Union and open immigration, we're still seeing it. The European media is out there saying that anybody who's opposed to open borders and just welcoming in everybody, they're just being racist. They don't have a legitimate reason to want to control the population coming in and out of their country. And it really is absurd.
Google Bilderberg list, attendee list.
Yes.
It's on there, and Petraeus is over there.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, but you hunt the list, you can find it.
Yeah, my understanding is the Bilderbergers are absolutely in a panic because the results of the European Parliament elections really hammered home the point that the people of planet Earth are just fed up with this whole New World Order, one world government, European Union, African Union, North American Union, because it's not working out for us. And apparently what they thought was going to happen is they were going to get all these unions up and running and merge them before the people inside those unions realized that it was just another way of enslaving us to those privately owned central banks. And we're starting to see more and more countries turn away from that system. There's 132 countries want to unhook their national banking systems from that global private central banking cartel. A couple of years ago, or it was last year, Hungary kicked out their private central bank. And that's the first large country to get rid of a Rothschild-style private central bank since Germany did it in the 1930s, which led to the global banking boycott against Germany, which set the stage for World War II.
Hey, another thing, I'll tell you what I do. You know these mailback cards in magazines, Forbes and Time and Newsweek? I took them all up, and I told them about the Bilderberg party at the Marriott Hotel in Copenhagen. They know about it, because I know I told them.
Well, they know about it, but they also know that they're supposed to look the other way because this is all the money and the power in the world, and the corporate media's job is not to actually report on what's going on in the world, but to keep us all distracted and bemused and dazed and bikinis. In fact, they were just running a thing on Fox here about some TV show is finally getting its own DVD, and the cast got back together for I can't remember the name of it. And it was just, it's advertising. They're using the news media to advertise and sell product, and it really isn't interesting to us at all. And it doesn't.
Nice talking to you.
All right. We're going to switch to Shane in North Carolina. Aloha, Shane. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? I want to kick it off with saying I've been enjoying the guests lately, some great interviews, and I definitely enjoyed that Fetzer interview that you just did. That guy seems pretty sharp, and he seems legit, although if I'm not mistaken, he was actually in the. I've known him to be like a no-planer, and I don't just mean, missile at the Pentagon no-planer either. I'm pretty sure that guy's like a hologram no-planer. But I mean, I don't think he's, maybe he's just confused or whatever. But anyway,
or he's being used by somebody. And I was concerned about having him on the show. But as long as we confined him to James Norvell's book, it's obvious he knows what he's talking about. Obviously, I do not agree with James Fetzer on the issue of no plane at the Pentagon or holograms, or apparently he supports the idea that Building 7 and the World Trade Towers were brought down with micro nukes, and there are so many obvious reasons why that would not be the case. So, again, I had misgivings, but it did turn into be a really good interview.
He's clearly a really sharp guy. That's not the main reason I called, though. But, I actually like the guy. I mean, he's a thought-provoking guy. And I would actually like to hear, different people on that. There might actually even be a little bit of debate over issues like that, not some 9/11 issues, or even geoengineering or stuff like that. But so things aren't just a total echo chamber. But I also think you should consider Wolfgang Halbig. He's been doing a lot of interviews lately, but I think you would do a fantastic job interviewing him. So someone you might want to consider talking to. And then the main reason I was calling is you were talking about the media, inciting riots and, stirring things up the way they do. And to me, it's almost comical to think about, they're clearly trying to do that, but at the same time, they're trying to make everybody docile with fluoride in the water and all these chemicals, in the food and, everything. I just kind of wonder if that's working against them. They can't really get people riled up the way they want because they're all doped up on fluoride and God knows what else.
We've seen many examples of how one part of the government is doing their things often at cross purposes to other parts of the government. And I think that story that we did yesterday about the USDA confiscating and destroying 47% of this raisin producer's crop to prop up prices is an example of how absurd government has become, because we have millions of hungry people in this country. Can't we at least give them the raisins? It's not like they're going to go to the store and buy them anyway. There really is a lack of any kind of a unified policy or plan. It's just everybody is, maintaining their own budgets. They're maintaining their own corruptions. They're doing favors for cronies. And really, the federal government has lost the overview of what is best for the nation as a whole, and that is supposed to be their job. Most essentially, it is the president's job. Harry Truman used to say that the job of the president wasn't to create the laws or to do anything like that. It was primarily about throwing cold water on a lot of foolishness coming out of the Congress. Okay?
Yeah, their hypocrisy makes it impossible for them to hold on to the narrative like you've said previously.
Okay, Shane, we got to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, interesting story. This is coming out of New York. Wantagh High School, responding to telephone bomb threats, adopted a policy of banning all student backpacks and sealing all the student lockers and requiring the students to sign a little ledger when they want to go and use the bathroom, in and out. I mean, what are we teaching our kids when we send them to what are effectively prison conditions for 13 years of their lives? These kids are now being forced to carry all of their books and belongings in clear plastic bags, sign in and sign out to use the bathroom. They are presumed to agree to searches as they come and go, random. This is absurd. And I'll tell you something else here, that those phoned-in bomb threats that justified this treatment of our children, they're a hoax. And how do we know this? Remember what I said about look for what should be there and isn't. The NSA that is monitoring all of our phone calls has not come up with the name of the person making the bomb threats to give to the police, which would be a far more reasonable and appropriate way of dealing with that problem. So what's going on is they're trying to raise the next generation of kids to be obedient and be willing to live inside cages for their entire lives. And they're doing it with more hoaxes and frauds. Because if that was a real bomb threat, all the police have to do is go to the fusion center and say, okay, who was calling the school at this time? Hasn't happened, has it? It's a fake. Now, another story coming out of Chicago. I don't know about you, but when I graduated, part of the tradition is as soon as you're declared a graduated class, you take off those little mortarboard hats and you throw them in the air. Huzzah, huzzah. It's a long-standing tradition. But apparently this Chicago high school issued an order. Do not throw your caps. They might come down and inconvenience somebody. They could be used as shuriken. It could be a terrorist weapon. Well, the kids got excited and exuberant, and they threw their hats anyway. And the school is now refusing to give them their actual diplomas as punishment for a celebration. End of school, we're out, we're graduated. Not that those diplomas are worth anything, of course, in this day and age. But it's another example of completely over-the-top, heavy-handed punishment of the kids to just get them used to being punished for every little minor transaction. I mean, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. I hope somebody sues them. Okay, over in Oakland, California, there's been another incident where there was a special needs student in a wheelchair who was not getting to his next class as quickly as the school security guard thought he should. And the guard, without permission, grabbed the chair and started to push it. The kid panicked and wound up with this school security guard basically beating this kid in a wheelchair. And it was caught on the school's video camera system. I've been a teacher myself. That's not what education is supposed to be about here. Over in Tulsa, Oklahoma, another school police officer saw two kids in a car. When they spotted him, they tried to drive away. He just pulls out his gun and opens fire on them. Thankfully, didn't hit anybody. The kids were just making out. They were doing the old high school tongue tangle. That's not grounds to be shot at. It is. It's completely out of control. All these police departments and security companies, they're all getting their training from Israeli security companies. What we're seeing start to emerge here right now is what the Palestinians have been living with for decades. And they're trying to set up the same system here. Keep you down, keep you in your place. Don't stand up, don't complain. Just breed new soldiers and new workers. Give us your money and sit down and shut up. That's the new model of the U.S. attitude toward the American people, as enforced by the police department. If I can get up the money to move back to the mainland, I'm going to move to Indiana. They just passed a state law there that if the cops are trying to break into your home illegally, you can shoot them. Now, over in Utah, as if they didn't have enough problem, there's been a major oil spill out there, and the Bureau of Land Management, whose jurisdiction it is, has been saying that this is contained, it's contained, that don't worry about it, no pollution, it's all been contained. They've now been exposed as having just completely made that up. The oil is still leaking, it's still getting into places it ought not to be, and the Bureau of Land Management was just out there shoveling the USDA choice bovine excrement at us all, to just make it look like the problem had gone away. Now, over in Britain, GlaxoSmithKline is now facing a criminal investigation by the Serious Fraud Office. Fraud comes in a lot of different levels. The Serious Fraud Office is the office that takes the really big corruptions. And GlaxoSmithKline is accused of bribery as part of their commercial practices. Now, we all know these pharmaceutical companies are always giving things to the doctors to recommend their medication. They get invited to conventions, and they get really nice hotel rooms, and some of these contracts for various things like Gardasil vaccine. The medical establishment gets a kickback on every one of the shots here. Sometimes the bribery gets a little on the other side of legality, and apparently the government of Britain is saying enough, 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 because apparently GlaxoSmithKline was bribing doctors not only with cash, but with prostitutes to get them into supporting their drugs. And that right there tells you that GlaxoSmithKline understands that their products can't sell on their merits. So, yes, we're going to get some hookers to just do hooking things to the doctors, and they'll sell our medication. And I rather doubt that this sort of practice is confined just to Great Britain. It's just Great Britain's trying to do something about it here. Now, up in Sonoma County, there's a story which I find very alarming. And it involves a guy named Jeffrey Keating, who has been paying premiums on his Obamacare-compliant health insurance policy. He was allowed to keep his existing policy because it was declared Obamacare compliant. It's Anthem Blue Cross. So this guy comes down ill, goes to the hospital, discovers he's got runaway cancer. We've got a dozen tumors in his head, more tumors around his body. It's just highly aggressive. And they put him in the hospital. They had to remove a half-liter of fluid from his lungs. They had to give him steroids to try and control the brain swelling, and they administered emergency chemotherapy. And then Anthem Blue Cross denied the claim, sent this family a letter saying that his emergency hospital treatment for this sudden onset of cancer, quote, didn't meet the criteria for medical necessity. So, you know all those death panels that were rumored as part of Obamacare? It does look like they exist, because if you all of a sudden one morning wake up and you've got a dozen brain tumors and a bunch of other tumors around your body, your lungs are filled with fluid, and your brain is swelling and you're on the verge of death, that is a medical necessity. You need treatment right then and there. And his Obamacare-compliant health insurance coverage said, nah, we don't see it was necessary for you to go there. You could have stayed at home and, read your Bible or something, and you would be just fine. Now, maybe Blue Cross was doing this guy a favor, because there's an interesting article over at the Daily Mail where a survey of doctors showed that if these doctors came down with cancer, they would not use chemotherapy. Even though they're in the business of selling it to their patients, they themselves would not use it. You think about that one for a while. All right, we got a caller waiting on the line, but we're on a commercial break here. So Shannon, drink some coffee, walk around, get some fresh air. We're going to come back and take your phone call as soon as we're back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We got a couple of callers waiting on the line. We're going to start with Shannon in Tennessee. Aloha, Shannon. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you're always talking about the blueprint for the new America. I've got a couple of points I want to make, and then I'll hang up and listen off air. The first thing is there needs to be some rules made about police powers. I think that the police, with a few exceptions, about 90% of them don't need to be armed. They need to go with the same kind of thing that the old British bobbies used to be. And that's one thing. And another thing is there ought to be a complete ban and outlawing of pepper sprays and tasers and all these flash bang deals. And then the last thing is they need to, and I know you probably have spoke about this a lot in the past, but this war on drugs is just a total failure. And we know that it's all about protecting the CIA and the government's own sales of drugs, but that stuff needs to be done away with. And, sadly, we know that some people, you can't help them no matter what they do by protecting them with laws and stuff. They just need to legalize the stuff and tax the heck out of it. And if somebody's stupid and they want to kill themselves, then, what can you do? And that's the points that I wanted to make, Mike, and I'll listen off air. Okay, well, I'm not sure I agree with you about things like pepper spray. I agree with outlawing the tasers because they're proving not to be the non-lethal wonder that everybody said. We know that these tasers can stop your heart if you get that jolt at just the right point in the beat cycle. And because they're promoted as non-lethal, the cops have no reason not to use them. And basically those tasers, it's just a police beating with all the modern improvements.
But the problem is we already have laws that are supposed to constrain the actions of the police against the American people. They're simply not being enforced. And we see this from Congress all the time. There's a huge scandal. Oh, we'll pass new laws. And it turns out the problem was the old laws weren't being enforced. And the police are very much out of control. And a lot of this is obviously coming in with all of this Israeli training, which is dispensing with ideas about serving the public and preserving the public order and safety in favor of shoot first and ask questions later. Your job is to keep these people down in the gutter. And that's exactly how they are behaving. All right, we're going to switch over to Eddie in Ohio. Aloha, Eddie. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, Eddie Taylor here in Ohio. I wanted to mention something regarding the stem cell technology because I noticed you talked about Dr. Steenblock, and I have a friend, he inherited the legacy of Dr. George Merkel, who actually created stem cell technology about 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Most people aren't aware. He took a kidney cell and grew a whole kidney, and he videotaped it, and it all kind of got lost in history. He had about 450 inventions. 95% were confiscated on the premise of national security. But
yeah, that happens a lot.
Product. Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. Well, he had a very extraordinary health product. And by the way, some of his other achievements, he showed the De Beers how to make synthetic diamonds. He created the world's first nuclear submarine. Of course, he worked for the wrong people for about 30 years before he knew who he was working for. And he slowly disengaged himself at his own lab. And he got this idea he was going to create this ultimate health product. And he was impressed by the Sumerian civilization, the Mesopotamians or the Anunnaki, like Zachariah Sitchin likes to talk about. But in any event, why he studied that civilization, he said the world's largest cut stone is like, 100 tons, and it's there. Now, I want to learn that science, and what do they know about health and technology in general? So he called the Smithsonian, said, send me a couple of 200 cuneiform tablets. And, of course, he had all the strings he could pull. So they said, well, what's your address, Dr. Merkel? And anyway, he wound up teaching himself the Sumerian language. But he created this health elixir called Life Crystal. But it disappeared
Eddie,
after the FDA went crazy on him.
Okay, Eddie, it sounds like you're trying to sneak a commercial in on me. Can we sort of get to the point? Because our call screener said you wanted to talk about GMOs.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. I went that route because I saw you had the interest in the stem cell, but no, that's fine. I understand. The thing with the GMO, there's two ways to go. You can always take it to court in Congress, and someday you'll make these people stand down. But meanwhile, what do farmers and gardeners do? I just wanted your listeners to know there are people out there. I have a friend. He's an ag consultant, and he told me, he's been an agriculture consultant for 35 years, he had a field of corn with 500 acres surrounded by GMO pollen. No GMO plant grew up in 500 acres of corn because of his agricultural science. And I just wanted your listeners to be aware, very few people are aware, there's another approach to the GMO issue. Obviously, it shouldn't be used, but it'll be a long time before you can stop it. Meanwhile, how do you keep your food clean from GMOs? See? So that was one thing. And the other thing is I've done a lot of research on the radiation issue, and I've discovered some things that are able to remediate radiation. And although you won't see it in the paper, of course, but that's another big interest of mine.
Okay, can I, Eddie, we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I'm going to have to let you go. But
sure.
If you want to email me this stuff, I will take a look at it. But we do need to get on back to some of the stories that we're covering today here because it's a really, really busy news day. So we're going to let you go here. And I mentioned this earlier in the show, but I'm going to come on back to it. We're seeing some very alarming news stories. Russia Today is reporting that half of all U.S. adult computer users have been hacked one way or another in the last year. Half. If it wasn't you, look at the guy next to you or the gal next to you. They're the ones. They got my wife. Last Christmas shopping season, she had one of these credit cards with a radio chip in it. Didn't even take it out of her wallet, wasn't using it, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of charges showed up on it. Somebody with a backpack with a scanner and the rest of that stuff was snarfing all these numbers and selling them online to people who fake credit cards. So it's happening here. And so Russia Today is reporting half of all the U.S. adults, computer users, have been hacked in the last year. It's a huge number of people. Article over at Huffington Post, Cybercrime on the Rise, the survey finds. Okay, and basically saying it's a huge and rapidly growing problem. Now, I'm sure they're going to say your solution is to buy new computer security, whatever. But again, look for what should be there and isn't. Where is the NSA in all of this? They're supposedly monitoring all of our computer systems, supposedly recording all of our phone calls. Half of American adult computer users are the victim of computer crime, and not one of these computer criminals has been exposed. The NSA would love some good publicity. They'd love to be able to point to something and say, see, we are doing something of value to you, the American people. Nothing. Total silence, which leads us to one of two possibilities. The first possibility is the NSA is totally incompetent when it comes to real criminals and terrorists, which I think we've proven is certainly possible with our NSA challenges. Or the NSA itself is behind this storm of hacking attacks to create a case for the government to say cybercrime is out of control, we have to redesign and take more complete control over the internet to save you, the American people, from the cyber criminals. But remember back when they were doing the Exxon Amendment to the Telecommunications Act to deal with the scourge of pornography all over the internet, and it turned out all the pornography was coming from these government and military IPs to build the case. Oh, if you don't want to look at the porn any longer, you will let us impose censorship. All right, there's the music. We're going to have to take a break for our top of the hour segment. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to the computer and NSA news again, we are now getting a report that France has reaffirmed that they will deliver those Mistral helicopter carriers to Russia, complying with their contract despite pressure from the United States. So the rest of the world is really not all hot and bothered to get into this bipolar America good and Russia bad mentality, mostly because the economic globalism that the bankers have worked so hard to create is now working against them. Sort of hoisting with their own petard there. Now, earlier in the week, we were talking about a new malware that was hitting iPhones and iPad users, absolutely ending this idea that Apple products are somehow more immune to malware than, for example, Windows or Android or Google phones. It's just up until recently there weren't enough users of the Apple products to make it worthwhile to write malware for them. Apple's only statement was to deny that the attack had anything to do with their iCloud service and to tell everybody to please change the passwords on their Apple account immediately, which is always a good idea to do that on a regular basis. Well, security researchers have confirmed that, yes, indeed, this ransomware is coming through the iCloud account and specifically seems to be going through a feature called Find My iPhone, which you can turn on in settings so that if your phone is misplaced or stolen, it will go into snitch mode and basically say, I am sitting next to this Wi-Fi router, and you can call the police. If you have not turned on the Find My iPhone feature, then you are probably safe from this ransomware. But again, as a general habit, you ought to be changing your passwords, and if it means writing them down on a slip of paper and putting it in your wallet. I had a friend of mine who called in the other day where he changed the password on his computer and then promptly forgot the new password. So we had to sort of hypnotize him and get him to remember what it was. With all the passwords that you're carrying, keeping an Excel spreadsheet or a list in your pocket, in your wallet, someplace where you can get to it in an emergency, I would not use any of those online password saving systems. I mean, come on, you're trying to keep this off the net and you go up to this cloud-based password server, and you're just asking for trouble, in my opinion. Probably going to get nasty email from some of those people now. Alrighty, now over in Germany, where they are very indignant over NSA spying on ordinary law-abiding citizens, they were basically looking at a criminal prosecution against the National Security Agency for spying on German citizens. Well, Germany has just dropped the prosecution, probably because the NSA reminded German intelligence that they're doing exactly the same thing. There was a little public blurb about it earlier in the week. And so German intelligence probably said, all right, we got to back off. They got us by the short and curlies. And that is the real danger of this intelligence agency-ocracy. Not even sure. Spookocracy. We'll call it spookocracy. If they're listening to everybody, if they're spying on everybody, judges, senators, representatives, executives, then they're the true power, because they can go to anybody and say, we have found all your dirty little secrets. We got all the details of just how you became rich and powerful, and you will now do what we tell you to do, or we will make it all public. Remember when Obamacare went up to the United States Supreme Court, it was expected to lose because Chief Justice Roberts, the deciding vote on a split court, was adamantly opposed to it, and then at the last second he turns around and says, I guess it's legal under the Commerce Clause. Legalized, Obamacare, and then promptly left for a vacation for a week so we wouldn't have to deal with the outraged press. Now, earlier in the week, of course, NBC aired their interview with Edward Snowden. And yesterday on the phone we were talking about how, Snowden didn't say this and Snowden didn't say that. Well, we don't really know, because what was aired was what NBC decided to air. And we already know that they excised out some of his comments about how all of this NSA spying was already going on at the time of 9/11, and obviously the government wasn't able to stop it. And, of course, my view is the government didn't want to stop it. But it turns out Edward Snowden was interviewed for a total of 4 hours by NBC, out of which they edited one 60-minute segment. So basically, what NBC aired was only 25% of what Snowden said. And he may have said a lot of other things in those that missing 75% that are even more interesting. And NBC just decided, the American people don't need to hear that. Now then, one of the things Edward Snowden did say on the interview was that he wasn't just a low-level computer analyst, that he had, in fact, received training to be an intelligence asset and had even worked overseas under a fake identity. His cover was a computer expert, which he certainly is, but he was there for intelligence gathering reasons. And, of course, this is already being hotly denied by the NSA. And Robert Baer is out there saying, I absolutely know that Edward Snowden was not a spy. Well, how could you know that, Robert? Do you know every spy that works for the United States of America? Because generally those things are kept under wraps and tightly compartmentalized, which makes this blanket declaration, I know for a fact he's not trained as a spy. It's more nonsense, more lies here. Now, one of the things when Edward Snowden first went public about all this spying, and everybody said, oh, he's a traitor, he should have gone through channels, he should have tried to correct the system from within, and of course Edward Snowden said, yes, he tried to approach the correct authorities and say, look, this is illegal, this is going to get us in trouble. And the NSA has been denying all along that Edward Snowden ever tried to fix the system from within, to make it look like he just got it into his head one day to go on out and blow the whistle. Well, now the NSA has acknowledged that that is not entirely true. And the NSA has released at least one of Snowden's emails after denying it existed all this time. They basically confirmed what Edward Snowden was saying with the NBC interview, that yes, at first, before he went public, at first, he was trying as hard as he could within the NSA, within the system, trying to fix it. And the NSA just had this attitude of, we can do this. We're above the law. We're the National Security Agency. We don't have to obey the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. What do you think this is, a republic or something? Now, for those of you who are using encryption, there's been an interesting development regarding an open source cryptography product called TrueCrypt. And all of a sudden, the TrueCrypt website had a sudden surprise announcement that they are pulling the plug on the project. There will be no more development on TrueCrypt, and this announcement included a warning about unfixed security errors in TrueCrypt and said this is not secure. Well, it's not going to take Sherlock Holmes to figure out what's going on. The NSA apparently tried to backdoor TrueCrypt like they've backdoored everything else. And TrueCrypt, the people behind TrueCrypt just said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to play that game. We're not going to be out here claiming to have a secure encryption system that we know is deliberately made insecure for the benefit of the NSA. Remember, not too long ago, it was revealed that RSA's security products were backdoored. At this point, assume everything's backdoored. They're into the routers. They're into your operating systems. It's all backdoored. And again, for those of you who are programmers, I have my NSA challenges out there which contain code snippets with ways to encrypt data that so far have not been broken by anybody. And they're not even all that sophisticated. I'm kind of proud about the latest one. So you can write your own encryption to protect your data. Of course, the government is now taking the idea that the Fifth Amendment doesn't mean you can't refuse to give them your password, especially when you got a rifle pointed at your skull. But again, between the loss of all these tools and shutting down and foreign companies absolutely avoiding American networks and providers, our IT industry is being bankrupted by what the NSA did. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. A couple more notes about things having to do with computers. One of the risks these days of using pirated software is the people who are making it available aren't doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Okay, and usually when you have a pirated copy of whizbang.whatever, there's something in there that you probably don't want on your machine, and this is proven to be true with this popular game Watch Dogs, which has been cracked, and there are copies of it all over the place. And when you download and install and play the game, it turns out they're turning your machine into a Bitcoin botnet. So they're using your compute cycles to basically run this Bitcoin mining thing, which I think is a crowdsourced public key cracker, I might add. And you really do need to be very, very careful of that sort of things here. If you want the game, if you want the whatever, go ahead and buy it. They're not that expensive. And you are rewarding the people who created that software, as they should be. And right now there's just a lot of very evil, nefarious people out there on the Internet, and they're probably all working for the NSA, trying to find new ways to get into your machine. And by the way, all of this is a violation of the Fifth Amendment, not the part about self-incrimination, but down there at the bottom where it says, private property shall not be taken for government use without just compensation. You've got the NSA using your compute cycles on your computer or cell phone or tablet. They're using your bandwidth coming into your home. They're using your router. They're using your space on your hard drive, your memory, for their purposes without compensating you one tiny penny. So it's another reminder that this government has gone completely off the constitutional reservation. Those amendments, that Bill of Rights, was created for very good reason by men who understood that over time government will become abusive. It will become oligarchical. It will become tyrannical. And they were trying to delay it as long as possible. All righty. Now then, apparently, we've been hearing about all these new high-tech gizmos that law enforcement are using to spy on you, again, without warrants. And apparently one of their systems is called Nice Recording Express. This is a voice recording software from a company called Ra'anana, which is based in Israel, and it creates these law enforcement systems, which all of these Israeli trainers teaching our police department say, here, you should want to buy this. And now it turns out that this Nice Recording Express has a built-in hardwired backdoor with a hardwired password, and by that I mean it's burned into the chips. You can't remove it like you can with something that's a backdoor in a piece of software. It's a physical part of the machine, and it means Israel is getting everything that these machines capture when the American police are using them to spy on you. Now, here's a good one. As you probably are aware, all of these large telecom companies are supporting the end of net neutrality on the claim that, well, they're basically private corporations. They're not public utilities, and therefore they should not have to comply with common carrier considerations. But you know what's kind of interesting? There's a very bizarre hypocrisy, because it wasn't all that long ago that Verizon claimed it was a public utility to get special government contracts. So here we are again. We're a public utility for the purpose of getting these lucrative government contracts. But when the government says we have to treat all internet traffic equally, oh, no, we're a private corporation here and we're under no obligation. Just bite themselves on the rear end. Okay, I know a lot of people are very upset and concerned about the so-called smart meters. And a lot of the concern is sort of being focused on the radio waves. Are we suffering from radio wave pollution, molecular resonance? Is it going to be a problem? But it does turn out there is one concern that now has been confirmed, and that is that these new smart meters, which are being installed on your homes, ostensibly so the power company doesn't have to send somebody around to read the meters and annoy your dogs and everything. But it turns out these smart meters are, in fact, equipped to pull your household wiring, looking for any appliances that are also designed to listen in and say, yes, we are here, to monitor what appliances you have on when you have them on. Now, on the plus side, this would allow the power companies to more effectively manage power level distribution to save fuel costs. But obviously, it also gives anybody else who has access to these smart meters the ability to know what you're doing and when you're doing it. When is your TV on? When is your stove on? You know, do you have hydroponic lights in the basement that we need to do a kick down the door raid and make sure that tomatoes are the only thing you're growing in there? And right now, with a government so openly abusive of our civil rights and our right to privacy, I don't care if the smart meter makes our home more efficient for the power company. I'm not willing to accept that as a reason to allow the government to know when I've got my TV on, or what channel it's tuned to, or when I've got the radio on, or when the computers are on. Another obvious aspect to these smart meters is it makes shutting off power for non-payment of bill that much easier. Nobody has to come out and pull the meter and put a lock on there. They just type into the computer, the meter shuts off your power, end of story. So, my goodness, what an ugly, ugly nation the United States has become. Getting on back to ClimateGate and global warming, and we are hearing very alarming rumors that next week the Obama administration is going to try and use an executive order to do an end run around the Congress to impose carbon controls, carbon fees, carbon taxes on the United States. Now, this, of course, greatly exceeds the authority of the president. It certainly violates the origination clause in the Constitution, which says all revenue measures must begin in the House of Representatives. They violated that with TARP, which originated in the Senate. There's a lawsuit already against Obamacare for violating the origination clause, because that, too, originated in the Senate. And now we're hearing that Obama, he's going to wave around this 800-page report saying you're all going to die if you don't pay a carbon tax, and he's going to say, I will save your life by taking more of your money. That's what he's going to be saying. Meanwhile, article out of Stephen Goddard, WordPress.com. The actual raw data is showing there has been no change in Arctic sea ice over the last 19 years. When they have been screaming, the poles are melting, the polar bears are drowning, we're all going to get flooded on the seashore. And then, of course, Al Gore bought himself a beachfront home out in California, which tells you he knew it was nonsense. Now, of course, we're seeing all of the carbon Nazi scientists are out there trying to explain, well, yeah, global warming is real, it's a crisis, but the reason the poles aren't melting is the wave shapes are different from what we anticipated. It is just amazing the extremes they will go to not have to admit that the world has gone into a cooling phase and taxing carbon dioxide isn't going to do a thing about the climate. It's another scam from the government that is the master scammer of all of human history. There's been another appeals court ruling saying that the First Amendment does allow us to take cell phone video of police on duty out in the public. And the cops still keep taking the phones and cameras and whacking people over the head. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to be covering some stories here. Now, as you may be aware, the National Security Agency has been sued by the Electronic Frontier Foundation over this illegal, unconstitutional spying on the American public. Now, remember, when this scandal first broke, when Snowden first went out there, and we were being told that all they're saving from the phone calls is the metadata, and that's not technically a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And now they're admitting that, yes, they're recording the audio on phone calls. I'm still waiting for Glenn Greenwald to come out with this list of 2 million Americans the NSA was spying on, and I hope he doesn't. I hope he's not traveling around in small aircraft. Let's just put it that way here. But apparently in a court filings in this EFF case, they're asking the court declare a judgment of adverse interference over the admission by the National Security Agency that they have now destroyed years of records of the NSA spying on the American people. The government has actually admitted to it in recent court filings, saying we cannot provide the requested documents because they were all sent to the shredder, so forth and so on. So there are all this information they collected on you, and now they're just throwing it all away to save their own gluteus maximi. What a hideous waste of money that was. There's an alarming new development over in Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. Now, apparently Turkey, which sits on the Euphrates River, has been pumping much of that water through pipelines into Syria and Iraq. Well, apparently the government of Turkey is now concerned because the level of water in Lake Assad has dropped about 6 meters. I'm sorry, this lake in Syria has dropped by 6 meters, and what they found out is basically Ankara, Turkey, has shut down or slowed down those water pumps because they need the water. And that is going to seriously complicate the situation in Syria and Iraq, especially with regards to the United States. Now, just for a minute, stop and think about all these trillions of dollars spent on these wars of conquest to control the oil and control the gold and bring the world back to Bretton Woods. Think about all the trillions of dollars created out of thin air to be poured all over Wall Street to save them from that 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, and then stop and think how much could have been accomplished by putting that money into genuine, serious research to solve some of these problems. Now, I understand a patent was just granted for a new type of membrane filter, which is going to make large-scale, cheap desalinization possible. But instead of spending all this money propping up the banks and promoting war, what amazing things could have been accomplished. The problem is that right now in the United States, research programs or experiments in alternative energy are intentionally set up to fail, so the oil and gas companies can go on saying, well, alternative energy would be nice, but hey, we can't get it to work, so tank up your car on a gasoline. Or we get these frauds like ethanol-based gasoline, which turned out to be producing more greenhouse gases than regular gasoline and damage the fuel system on older cars. Because they're all being set up as public relations stunts, not as real, genuine research. Apparently over in Kansas, a former state legislator has pled guilty to defrauding Farmers and Merchants Bank of Colby, Kansas, of more than $465,000, much of which went into his political campaign. Excuse me. Getting pollen here on the wind out here in Oahu. So apparently this was the way this guy operated. He defrauded the bank of almost $500,000, put it into his campaign account, and ran for office. Now, this is a very tragic story, and it just grieves me to see this kind of thing. Apparently, in Palm Beach County, there was a woman, Kimberly Lucas, who is facing murder charges in the death of her former partner's 2-year-old girl. And the woman's excuse for killing the 2-year-old girl was hearing a sermon from Genesis 22, which is where God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son to prove love of God, and then at the last second comes in and saves the kid. And this woman is saying that, she was just doing what the Bible told her to do, but God didn't show up to tell her to stop. That's her excuse for killing the 2-year-old. Oh, my, oh, my, oh, my. All right, let's see what else is going on here in the local news here. The House of Representatives has apparently voted through their new federal Journalist Shield law. This is basically the implementation of this idea that only journalists working for corporate media organizations getting a paycheck are going to be protected as journalists under the First Amendment. And everybody else, meaning us, the independent media, we're just ordinary citizens, subject to the suppression of our right to free speech and free association. So they're pushing that agenda. Remember, we heard Chuck Schumer was out there on video the other day saying the First Amendment needs to be revised. We're going to revise the First Amendment. Freedom of speech is only guaranteed to the corporate press, and everybody else, the government has the right to tell you what to say and what to think. I don't think so. I definitely don't do that. 1 in 6 American men between the ages of 25 to 54 are not working. Unemployment is soaring in Germany and France, according to the latest figures. And there are now fears for Portugal's lost generation, an entire generation that is just not able to accomplish anything economically with their lives here. And it's just a horrible, horrible ongoing situation there. Russia is expressing concern over U.S. plans to increase military aid to the hired mercenaries inside Syria. And just, again, think about that double standard. The U.S. says the Syrian government is killing Syrians, so we have to arm the rebels and overthrow Assad. But over in Ukraine, where the junta is killing the Ukrainian people, oh, no, the Ukrainian government is right to do that. We're going to give them more weapons and arms and supplies. There's no consistent thread in America's foreign policy other than, give the weapons to the guys who are going to sell their people into the slavery of private central banking and attack anybody who dares stand up to this global banking cartel. I'm still waiting to see what excuse they're going to come up with to invade Hungary now that Hungary's thrown their central bank out. That's going to be a real tough one. They're hungry. They have weapons of mass destruction. They're enslaving their people. They're ruled by a cruel tyrant. They hate us for our freedoms. They have gas. They have germs. They tear the tags off their couch cushions and they pass gas in the elevators. That's going to be a tough sell. America invade Hungary? Why? I don't think so here. Concerns about a new federal government database that will be used to track every American's credit rating and all of their financial information. Anybody want to tell me what this has to do with national security? And the answer is it doesn't. They're closing the door to take control of your money. Already in Israel, they're talking about forcing a cashless society where everything goes through those plastic cards and the banks get a piece of the action of all commerce. One of the most important freedoms that we won in the American Revolution was the freedom to say no to the bankers. The way this nation was originally set up, you could, if you wanted, live your entire life without ever talking to a bank. You didn't have to put your money in the bank. You didn't have to borrow your money from the bank. We've lost that now. And now there's this big government database that's going to track everything that you do to make sure that they're not missing out on an opportunity to take more tax money from you. Absolute tyranny. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Jerry in Chicago. Aloha, Jerry. We may have to take you through the commercial break. What is on your mind?
Oh, Michael, thank you very much for taking my call. I wanted to ask you a quick question. Have you ever heard of an alternative energy source called a zero-point magnetic generator?
I've heard of it. It sounds to me like another perpetual motion device, and I haven't seen any demonstrator that shows that this is a viable concept. And unfortunately, there's a lot of fakery out there. I remember this radio engineer who was saying this radio thing he built was splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and look at all that energy. But what he wasn't telling you was far more energy in form of electricity was going into this machine than he was able to get out with the hydrogen and oxygen flame. There's a lot of fakery going on out there.
Okay, I just wondered what your opinion was of it, because I've never seen a true working model that was, I don't know, I want to say more than 20 watts output, and what can you power up with 20 watts?
Well, again, I want to see a working model, and I want to be sure there's no fakery. Jerry, got to let you go, got to take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today. We're going to take one more phone call. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? One thing, I got a good reason why the U.S. can invade Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
They got weapons of mass nutrition since they threw out Monsanto.
Yes, that's absolutely right there. Hungary banned GMO. They even went to the extreme step of literally burning every single field where GMO had been planted. They are absolutely dead set. They do not want that pollen in their country.
Well, like I say, weapons of mass nutrition. Oh, I'll let you wrap up your show, Mike. Have a good weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Got a couple more headlines before we get into the wrap-up here. Over at Investment Watch blog, they are reporting that a leak has come out from the European Banking Commission. They are preparing to seize money from all bank accounts on a flat-rate basis, which means if you're doing business with a bank that was doing their job correctly and didn't get exposed in all of these bubbles and everything, you're still going to lose money. They're just going to do a haircut across everybody all across Europe. The EU Commission is going to get into everybody's accounts. CNN is out here assuring us that Big Brother is making our lives better. I mean, that's right out of George Orwell's book. Yes, Big Brother's your friend. He's going to make sure everything is okay. Over at the Bilderberg meeting, Google chairman Eric Schmidt has been seen. All these big power players, and I'm sure they're all being told, you got to find some way to recapture all that online sociability so that people are only getting what we think they should be looking at. Meanwhile, in the wake of this obviously bogus election in Egypt, protests and riots are breaking out all across Egypt, clashes with police. We might actually see yet another Egyptian spring where they're going to kick out Sisi and try and bring Morsi back. And just say once and for all, we, the people of Egypt, will pick our own government. Remember, when we talk about the French Revolution in the history books, it wasn't one occurrence. France went through a handful of revolutions where they got rid of Louis XVI, and the new government came in and immediately started acting like the old government, so they were removed by force and a new group came in. And it wasn't until they got a government which understood their job was to make the French people lives better that stability returned. So we could see bang, 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 bang over there in Egypt here. Apparently there's a police officer in New Jersey who is suing his own police department, saying that he has been passed over for promotions and overtime because of his refusal to target young drivers to meet a traffic ticket quota system. That's kind of interesting here. Investment Watch blog again, James Rickards is saying hyperinflation is coming as it is the only way the U.S. can pay its debt. Well, obviously that is going to hit all of us very, very hard. We're going to be down in Zimbabwe territory with paper notes that say $100 trillion on them. But you know something? It's not really paying the debt. I mean, the debt looks paid on paper with the numbers, but when they're just printing out trillions and trillions of dollars and devaluing the dollar, the people who loaned this country real value to get something done with, they're just getting ink and paper back. I think most other countries already understand this, and I think that's why they're demanding either repayment or compensation or collateralization with the physical gold. We were talking about this yesterday. Everybody's wondering where all the gold in Fort Knox went. Where did the gold in the New York Federal Reserve that belonged to other people, where did it go? And I think in the wake of the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud, what happened is all those foreign banks and governments said, you've got to make good on the losses, and we don't want your ink and paper that is pouring out of those printing presses. You will make good with actual, real, physical gold for the losses that your fraud caused in our nation, or we will make the thing an international public scandal and destroy what remains of the credibility of the American banking system. I think that is where most of the gold went to. So, anyway, of course, we already talked about Jay Carney resigning. And, all right, well, let's see. We only got a few minutes left here. I'm going to back off here and basically cover a topic that I've been covering before. But I want you to think about this over the weekend. We are in an age where I think most Americans understand that it is not a unique, shocking event when you find the government has been lying to you. That in point of fact, it is when they tell you the truth that is the unique moment in history. This government has lied to you about everything, whether it's the unemployment numbers, the state of the economy, the rate of inflation, human-caused global warming, the efficacy of vaccines, the harmlessness of GMOs, a little radioactivity is good for you after Fukushima, don't need to worry about eating seafood out of the Gulf of Mexico, and on and on and on. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Oh my goodness, Pearl Harbor was a surprise. And the Israelis shot up the USS Liberty because it was really foggy. How long are you going to go on living with a government that lies to you? Because when you live with a government and the corporate media that lies to you to the extent that these do in the United States, you don't really know what's going on. All you know is the demands being placed on you for more of your money, more of your obedience, more of the lives of your children. And you're being given this total cock and bull story about what they're being sacrificed for. And we know it's a fraud. And they know we know it's a fraud. That's why they're trying to keep this drone memo classified. That's why the government of Great Britain is refusing to release these communications between George Bush and Tony Blair. They know we're on to them, and they're scared. I understand from reports coming from the Bilderberg meeting that is the top topic of conversation. That the world is turning away from this rush to large multinational regions and unions and the push toward global government. And even worse, the world is really beginning to see these private central banking families as the authors of so much pain and suffering and hunger and misery and war. And they're turning away from that. And without that private central banking scam, these people can't control you. And that's why they're trying so hard to just put pedal to the metal and go on out and just conquer those few remaining areas of the world that aren't part of their global banking cartel. And the problem is more and more nations are just cutting those computer lines and saying, well, we don't need to use your Bank of International Settlements. We're just fine right now. I don't think Hungary is going to be the last country to kick out their private central bank. I mean, Libya did and got invaded for it. But I think it's going to start happening because at the point where you have the European private central bank start skimming everybody's bank accounts, that's when it's going to get really, really ugly. And by the way, if you're in Europe, they won't announce ahead of time. They're going to do it like they did in Cyprus. You wake up one morning, your bank balance is reduced, and they say, oh, by the way, last night while you were asleep, we committed a major bank robbery against every single savings account here in our country because we had to give the money to the banks because otherwise their little pyramid scheme is going to collapse, and we don't want that to happen until somebody else is in office. So one more time, our common sense advice that we share with everybody who listens to our show and reads to our website, you should have no more money in the bank than you need to cover your obligations. Take the rest of it out. Keep it at home, part of it in cash, part of it in physical silver and gold. It is only a matter of time before all the scams and frauds start to fall apart. And physical metals are going to guarantee and preserve your real wealth. Because, again, we're seeing this report where running those printing presses on giant V12 turbocharged engines is the only way the U.S. government can pay off its debt, at least on paper, even though nothing of real value is being used to settle the debt. It is a huge mess. I'm frankly amazed they've kept it together as long as they have. By hook, by crook, by fraud, by lies, propaganda, and deception. But they can't keep it up forever. Be prepared. When it happens, it's going to happen real fast, just like it did when the Soviet Union went away. Or Romania. 2 weeks before the Romanian revolution, walking around looking, you said, everybody's fine, everybody's happy, everything's just fine. 2 weeks later, Ceausescu was machine gunned to death on Romanian national TV. It will happen that fast here in the United States. There's the music. I have to get out of here real quick. We'll be back on Monday. Have yourselves a really good weekend, and aloha, America.